This is Daryl Ehrlich at the Billings Gazette with Paul Cimmino. This is July 31st, 2015 at 11:12 a.m., and we are speaking with Paul about his experiences in Vietnam and the Vietnam War. Paul, thank you for agreeing to be a part of this. I really appreciate that. So, let's talk a little bit about the how you came to go to Vietnam.
Well, like a lot of people in 1969, when I graduated from high school, I wasn't really sure what direction I was going to go in. I had been in a rock band that actually did quite well, and but was for some reason they asked me to leave, and so my father, I have a legacy in my family. My father was in Patton's Army. And Uncle Jimmy was a captain in the military. He was a medical doctor. And so we had a lot of background in the military in my family. So I joined the Army thinking that, I was actually seeking to be a military policeman. I had been in law enforcement, the explorers, but ended up quite disdirected by my father, who said, go in armor and you can do anything. I didn't. Then I realized armor was a tanker. So I ended up getting through basic training and then ended up in Fort Knox, Kentucky for my AIT, which was armor. So I was a tanker. Then I spent about a year in Fort Hood as a tanker. But I had a lot of allergies then, and actually right now it's manifested years later. I have asthma. But at that point, it was so. When I got to Vietnam, rather than putting me in a tank, they put me in the infantry division, because I had somewhat of a brain, I think, and could think numbers through, they made me motor sergeant.
What's a motor sergeant?
Well, motor sergeant is you're in charge of all the vehicles in your unit, in our unit we had a lot of APCs, which was amphibious personnel carriers. We had tanks, we had jeeps, we had supply, and I had to coordinate all the mileage, the maintenance, and so forth. Probably one of the dubious tasks I had was if a vehicle was hit, I would have to make a determination whether it was a combat loss or we could repair it. And some of those excursions were quite interesting, going out and looking at a vehicle that had run over a mine. And I also had to go where I was stationed in Quang Tri, Vietnam, which is right on the demilitarized zone, and in headquarters company. And I had to drive up to a place called Charlie 2, which was a fire base, and Alpha 1, mostly Charlie 2, where we had vehicles, and take mileage, and then get a ride back. You would think as a motor sergeant I'd have my own vehicle, but I usually just hitchhiked or jumped on a half-ton truck and got a ride. And a couple of times going up there was quite interesting. Well, I haven't talked about this for a while, but since we're doing this interview, the first time I went up to Charlie 2, which was the first time I was outside of a regular base, which was kind of secure. And back then, in 1970, we were holding pretty good. We were pretty solid. Later, after I left to come home, which was, maybe I'll talk about that a little later, it was an emergency leave. Of course, Quang Tri was pretty much overrun. But when I was there, we were holding down pretty good. But anyway, so I'm in this half-ton pickup truck, not a half-ton, I'm sorry, quarter-ton, and I'm sitting on mortar ammunition, which was a resupply. And so we drove through this little town called Cam Lo, which was the last South Vietnamese village before you get to the DMZ. And these guys had stopped for a moment, and I guess they knew these South Vietnamese people right before we left the outskirts of the village, and then there was 3 or 4 miles of nothing between the village and going up to the Charlie 2 base camp. And we left, and as we were driving up there, I was just in the back, absorbing the bumps and so forth, and suddenly there was an explosion that was quite significant. And I remember a lot of black smoke coming back and engulfing, actually, the vehicle I was in. And, okay, I'll try to get through this. Sure. So I heard a lot of screaming and crying, and anyway, what happened was the vehicle in front of us was a half-ton truck, and it had run over a mine. However, the landmine was attached to a 200-pound bomb that was ours. Often our bombs wouldn't go off, so the enemy would booby trap them and use our bombs against us, So in this case, that's what happened. These guys had run over this thing. When I think about it, if they had missed it, maybe we would have run over it, and I'm sitting on all this mortar ammunition, so that would have been I would have been like a Sputnik, So, of course, hearing these screams and so forth, I jumped out of the truck I was in to go up and assist and help these fellas, and I didn't get 3 feet, and all of a sudden there was an M16 rifle put in my face by another soldier, Army soldier, and he said, "Stop." He said, "Get back in the truck." And I started arguing with him. I said, "Hey, these guys we got to, we're 25 yards from these guys. We got to go assist them." I mean, I could see the cab was burning, and so this guy locked and loaded down on me, and he said, "Get in the effing truck or I will blow you away," right? And I said, and I was stunned, and I said, what could I do? So I went back in the truck, and I'm continuing to hear these fellows screaming for help, and smoke still coming back there. And then there was a cook truck behind us, and this black soldier says, "Hey, man, be chilly." Instead of the word cool in Vietnam, the chili was the word. So, and he threw me an apple. And he says, "Eat this, man, everything will be cool," or chili, or whatever. Yeah. So later, I find out that this new officer had made a policy that when a mine was hit, that we couldn't get out because we had to do mine sweeping before we went out, which I still think was stupid.
Right.
But this other fellow with the M16 didn't. And then eventually the hospital helicopters came down. I didn't hear any more voices. I have no idea what happened. I don't think these guys made it. But so that was the first thing. And then so we move on and we go into Charlie 2. And entering the base, the guard that was there was an interesting fella. He was like, "Come on in, man, peace," Right. I'm saying to myself, "Dad, this isn't Patton's Army. Jesus."
This is not what I signed up for.
This is not what you told me it would be like, man. So I get into the thing, and this is all this day, and I'm looking for my vehicles, and I start, and I couldn't find them, so I see this man standing there, kind of a big guy, and he was an officer, I could tell that. So I poked him on the back, and he turns around, and there's 2 stars. It's a general.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I go, I said, "Sir, do you know where the motor pool is?" And he's just looking at me, doesn't say a word, and all of a sudden our major comes and says, "Are you in my unit?" "Yeah, yes, sir, yes, sir." And he starts chewing me out. And so this fella, our master sergeant, who later died May 21st, 1971, a bad day. That's another story. But he tells the major, he says, I'll take care of this guy. And the major says, you better, blah, blah, blah. So the sergeant major says to me, son, you know what that was over there? And I said, a general. He goes, yes, it was a general. And he says, number one, you don't call a general sir. You call a general general. Number two, where's your helmet? I was wearing my boonie hat. You don't have it, do you? No. He goes, okay, where's your weapon? I didn't bring it. He goes, okay. And he says, I'm going to tell the major that I took care of you. He says, but listen, he says, go carry out your duties. When I see you up here again, you better have your helmet on and you better have your .45. I said, yes, sir. He says, I'm not an officer. I'm a sergeant. Call me sergeant. And I said, okay. So anyway, I was shaking in my boots, and he told me where the motor pool was. So I go and I take the mileage, and at the end of the day, I'm looking for this quarter ton to get me back home. A lot nicer because it was emptied with, there was no ammunition, no more mortar ammunition in there. So these guys caught up with me, and they yelled at me, and they, come on, let's go. And so it started raining. It was monsoon season, and we ran out of gas, so we had to go literally in the middle of the compound is where the gas was. Okay, so we had to drive into mud, and so we're getting gas, and all of a sudden, incoming, and the enemy started firing rockets at us. Now, they were lousy shots, I'm telling you. They didn't even get into 90% of the time, they didn't even hit the compound. They were so bad. They hit all around, and you can hear, So we're getting gas, want to get the heck out of there. So we start going up the thing, and we can't get up. There's too much. Even with the four-wheel drive, we're sliding back down, okay? So about 7 or 8 guys helped push us out. We finally got out of there, and I just remember that guy just screaming out of there and looking back and seeing these little puffs of black smoke. I'm going, oh, my God. This was my first day out of the base camp. I don't know if I want to go to Charlie 2 anymore,
Right.
So anyway, just an excursion into my first experience out of Clause 3 base camp.
So that was all one day. You run into a general. You get basically an explosive device, your own, used against you, and then as you're leaving, you're getting shelled. How does for me, that's not my normal daily experience. Even though newspapering can be difficult, nothing like that. How does a person deal with that? How do you even make sense of it and cope with that without being just terrified?
Well, I'm 19 years old. I had been through training, and to be honest with you, Daryl. And my family knows this. I've told my family this. When I left to go to Vietnam, we flew over the San Francisco Bridge. I left out of Travis Air Force Base. And I looked down at that, and I said, that's it. I already had determined that I was not going to return. And I think that attitude actually helped me.
Okay.
Say
why.
Well, because I wasn't, I wanted to live and survive, but there was a part of me that already wrote myself off. So if I got back, it was an extra blessing, So with that attitude, I just couldn't wait to get back to my unit and get with my buddies and, maybe go party a little bit and listen to some Janis Joplin. And we only had 4 tapes, and one was Janis Joplin, Blood, Sweat, and Tear, McCartney, and I can't remember the other, The Doors, yeah.
So let's talk about that. One of the things that I've been asking that's been really interesting to people is, was there any music? A lot of the vets that I've been talking to have been talking about, what music we could hear. There was a personal anthem, or there's just a song that helped get me through. Were those 4 songs, or what was it for you?
Well, I happened to become buddies with the supply sergeant.
Okay.
And the supply sergeant had his own room in the back, and in those days, of course, we had the reel tapes.
Yep.
And and like I said, I know we had 4 of them, And all I know is that we listened over and over again to Janis Joplin, McCartney, that first tape he made on his own, just McCartney,
Yeah.
and Blood, Sweat, and Tears. So those three albums, I guess you would call them,
Right.
stand out in my mind. I could still hear the Blood, Sweat, and Tears. I can't remember the lead song offhand here, but and then of course Joplin, and so yeah, they become kind of signature, kind of reinforced in your brain. But you know, the comradeship was incredible. You know,
Tell me a little bit about that. It sounded like they became your family, your de facto family.
Yeah, for sure. And at that time in Vietnam, I'm almost hesitate to talk about the part that there was a lot of oppositional attitudes in the ranks. You know, by 1970, 71, what was happening in the States probably started to seep into the ranks of the soldiers. And the fact that we couldn't really win any territory, that you would go back to the same place and have the same firefights and lose guys, you know, was disturbing. And I think it was becoming obvious that it was a political war and it wasn't a war to win. I remember we had a artillery post not more than a quarter mile from where my barracks were, and barracks, hooches. We lived in hooches. And I talked to the team leaders, and they would say, you know, because we weren't allowed to shoot over the D into North Vietnam, but they certainly could shoot rockets and everything up, and they would always say, you know, we always get that coordinates wrong. But we have too much of a load in the shells, and they seem to get over there somehow, and it's a big mistake, but, you know. So in order to fire back at the rocket sites that were shooting at us, we had to break policy, you know. So we did fire back at them, but we weren't authorized. And there's a lot of discrepancies. For example, I remember when I went through ARVN training, which is before you go to Vietnam, you go to a week or two of this ARVN training where they have simulated Vietnam stuff. And they said, don't leave any cans, don't leave any metal. When you eat your C rations, don't leave the tin part or nothing, because they'll take them and they'll use them against you and blah, blah, blah. So I get to Vietnam, and what do I see as I'm driving up to Charlie 2? Piles of tin cans, just piles, and even 155 millimeter shells that are still strapped together that are not used, sitting on the side of the road, not guarded or anything. And I'm going, what?
Right.
What? So everything was backwards. The other thing, when I first did guard duty, we had bunkers. And we had about 30 bunkers surrounding our whole perimeter. And maybe I was in bunker 15 or whatever. And in the bunker, you have the Claymore mine keys that you hit if something happens, if you have a human wave attack or something. And then in there, there's like an actual, if you ever seen a movie where pirates, where there's a treasure chest, there was something that it was big, and it was like a treasure chest, and it had chains around it with a big lock. Now, I was told in that treasure chest is enough ordnance to have a civil war. But we couldn't get in it unless the OD came to unlock it. So can you imagine if there was a big attack or a human wave attack, we're going to wait for the OD, that's the officer of the day, to come with his key to unlock the thing. So we made agreements. We were going to hit the claymores and run.
Right.
I mean, we empty out our guns, which were the M16s and stuff, but then split. Because, first of all, the OD could get hit himself coming over to unlock your thing. So stuff like that was really weird. and there was like that kind of inconsistency totally all the time. And it didn't do much for morale, but it did do a lot for a kind of a, if you will, defiant or oppositional. I hate to say this, but we had General Westmoreland was our chief commander. I believe at the time Nixon was president, and those two pictures was in our hooch where we threw darts at him.
Yeah.
Sorry to say,
No, but it's frustrating, especially when you witness someone getting hit by a mine.
Yeah. Or oh yeah.
Or you're taking fire too. You expect to be supported.
Yeah, and I wasn't even an MOS of infantry. I was sort of on the outskirts of it, but as a motor sergeant. But I managed to get myself in situations that I didn't want to be in.
Right.
But the guys that were in the infantry were, they were terribly bothered by stuff like that.
When you when you look back and you think you're that you're leaving and you may not be heading back, and then you come back.
Yeah.
What's the effect of that?
Well, I'm going to mark my age here. February 9th, 1971, 6:08 a.m., Southern California. I'm from Sylmar. Big earthquake. If those who can remember that, and that earthquake pretty much devastated Sylmar, that was my hometown. And all I remember is that morning, a guy named Benici, another Paisan Italian guy, I'm Italian, comes running in. He goes, "Hey, Cimmino, guess what? LA's off the map." I go, "What? There is an earthquake. There's no more Los Angeles." I'm going, "What? Wait a minute."
Right.
So they arranged it, the USO, that we were all in line, and they had radio operators where we could talk on the telephone, and I actually was able to get a hold of my family, my parents, and you would have to go, "Hey, Mom, how are you? Over. We're okay here, son. Mom had a little bit of an injury, but, back and forth." So I was able to get an emergency leave to go home, which was really weird when I look back.
Yeah, tell me about what come in. So you're going up and you're servicing these front lines on the DMZ, and then in a few days, however much time passes, you're in LA?
Almost.
Okay.
Yeah, actually. So it took a little bit of finessing to get the thing approved, and I managed to. I was responsible for about 49 or 50 guys going home because of what I did. I was pretty good at manipulating, I guess, the system. I went to the pastor, to the priests, to all of that stuff.
The rabbi, if you needed to.
The rabbi, I don't care, Jewish, I'm Catholic, but anything will do.
Right.
I didn't care. So I managed to get us. So I was actually got home, and they asked me, "Do you mind if you take a death plane?" And I meant, "What?" So that's where they're transporting bodies back, and I said, "I don't care." So I got on a C-47. There was no such thing as pressurized cabins. We got up there, and I was on this net, and I remember just I'm sitting next to this tin-looking coffin. There was 4 of them, and this guy's name tag was there. I won't repeat it, but I have it in my head. And I kept saying, "Specialist so-and-so, specialist so-and-so." And I have to be honest. I said, "I'm so sorry, man, for you, but I'm glad I'm out here."
Right.
Yeah. It was kind of like I started having a dialogue with this thing,
Right.
So we landed in Tokyo, and there was this crazy Marine on the plane with me, and he says, "Hey, man, let's go AWOL and party in Tokyo, and then it won't be a big deal. We'll just slap our hands." I go, "What? Are you nuts?" So anyway, I went home, San Francisco, and literally this Marine let me stay at his house because the next day I had a TWA regular flight back to LA. And we went, he says, "Let's go to my friend's house." And we went to his friend's house where they were having some people over, and we walk in jungle fatigues, And they thought we were like looking for a costume party or something. And I said, yeah. And I'm going, no, we're for real.
Right.
We just came back from Vietnam. Really? You know?
They still don't believe you.
They still didn't. Anyway, so there was other parts of that story I won't talk about. But in any event,
A good party.
it was a party. It was a smoking party, I'll tell you. But I didn't partake because, anyway, just because. So the next day, I'm on a flight to TWA flight. I'll never forget. In those days, you know, the flight attendants had hats on and. They were really cute, you know.
Right.
So this young lady comes up to me and just treats me like a king and says, if I can do, her brother was in Vietnam at the time and she just pillows, do you need anything? And so I get this back home and they pick me up at Burbank Airport and I forget. We get to Somar, it's all sectioned off by LAPD. You had to show your driver's license to go into Somar. There was, outhouses. There was and I'm going to another war zone. I was thinking, wait a minute. That's right. There was an earthquake.
Right.
You know, so anyway, I was all set to go back to Vietnam. My buddies were there, and they were riding me, and it was really strange because I would see them on TV a day after, because there was a lot of action going on up there in Quang Tri at that point. And my mother is begging me, try to get a compassionate reassignment. Please, Paul, try to get I know, I got to go back. My buddies are waiting for me. So I get a letter from my buddies, and they said, if you come back here, we're going to collectively kick your
You can say
ass. Okay,
yeah,
can I say that?
You can say whatever you want here.
Okay. They said we're going to collectively kick your ass. Your hooch has been directly hit. You have nothing left. There's nothing to come back to. Don't come back. And 6 guys signed it. 6 of my buddies. Bullwinkle, Benici, who else signed it? Wynn. Daffy. Daffy was a shake and bake sergeant, so we call him Daffy. And that's where you go to school for 4 weeks and they make you a sergeant. And
really highly trained.
Highly trained. He was great, though. He was my good buddy of mine. We got some mischief up there. But anyway, so I start the process. I put in for a compassionate reassignment, and you get the priest, and you get people to write about. But I was reassigned to Fort MacArthur. Like I said, I was in the Law Enforcement Explorers, and so they saw that. They made me an MP, of all things, which was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, real
You
cool.
I finally got to. You
be,
didn't listen to your father and finally said, I'm going to try this on my own. It can't be any worse, right?
Right. So they made me an MP. It was great. San Pedro was about 80 miles from Silmar. So even though I had the barracks on the weekends, I can go home to Silmar, California, which was really great. And I was an MP, did this stuff, at the gate. And one night, our colonel came in, who was the base commander, and I stopped him. And I wanted to look in the car to make sure, and there was the colonel, and I was freaking out there. And then later, he called our company commander. He says, I like that MP at night. He really looked us over there. So my compassionate reassignment comes through. I get it. But on May 21st, 1971, and I have the thing, it was highlighted in the VFW magazine here, and it's partly why I did get some disability. This magazine here, it was a catastrophic engagement that had one of the worst that happened in Vietnam, and that was up at the Charlie 2 base, the cafeteria, where I had went quite a bit when I go up there to check mileage. Enemy incoming, one rocket luckily hit it. Unluckily, but for them it was a lucky shot because they hardly even got in the compound with their rockets, but it a direct hit, killed 30 guys. mostly my buddies, and that sergeant that got me out of trouble.
Really?
Yeah, he was a great guy. He was 6'6", white hair. I mean, just a strapping man, you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And I mean, that devastated me because I sort of had survivor's guilt, you know. I was thinking, because there was a part of me that even though, you know, one thing you would celebrate. Oh, I got to stay home. My compassionate came home. Even when I was on patrol in that police car and everything, I would think, I shouldn't be here. I should be in Quang Tri taking mileage, you know?
Right.
You know,
right.
listening to Janis Joplin. I could even bring them an extra tape, you know?
Right.
Led Zeppelin or something.
Right,
you know?
right. This is going to blow their mind.
Yeah, but unfortunately, well, whatever. Of course, I played out the rest of my my Army at Fort MacArthur. I started college. I went into the police academy, and there was an incident in the police academy with an instructor. I was doing great, but he had it in for me. I won't tell you what happened, but I think he made a mistake. I think he thought I was Hispanic, and I think there was more open racism going on then with Cimmino.
Right.
And anyway, I didn't make it through the police academy. A week before graduation, this guy cans me. So that was devastating for me. So I started college. I said, okay, well, I'll get a degree in police science. Well, I'm going to tell a story that I believe is worthy of telling, because I do believe that us Vietnam vets kind of helped pave the way for the guys today who I highly respect. These young men, Desert Storm, Afghanistan, Iraq, these guys are brave son of guns, as brave as we ever were. But they're coming home to a more receptive society, one in which actually celebrates and respects them. And I think in some ways those guys in Vietnam helped that along. I started college, and I have to tell you, my father one time when I wrecked his car as a teenager, and he was a painter, he made me paint all summer to pay for it. On the way home, you know, my sister skipped 2 grades. I was running around playing guitar. I was in a band that we almost made it, actually. We had a Capitol record contract. That's a whole other story. But one day we're driving home, and he says, you know, Paul, Italian guy, you know.
Right.
You know, Mama and I, we love you so much. We don't expect you to go to college. And Deborah, that's a different. She's skipping 2 grades, but you know, Paul, you can get a trade. You can become a plumber, or like me, a painter, or civil service. Maybe you like police work, but you can become a cop. You know, but don't worry about college. Well, of course.
I like that imitation.
Yeah, he does it good like that, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, I can go on with that guy. But anyway.
We all have fathers.
We all have a pop.
Right, yeah, right.
Yeah. So anyway, so I started college, you know, and the first class I took, it was sociology. I took the first quarter or second semester, might have been. Well, we were still in Vietnam, and Nixon was bombing the heck out of Hanoi to get them to submit. I remember that. And it was the sociology of institutions, and Dr. Mayers was the professor. And one day we were in there, and he wanted to talk about current events. How is this, what Nixon's doing, affecting the sociological blah, blah, blah. And I'm sitting in the front row, because I liked this Dr. Mayers. He was good. And behind me are these 2 young ladies, attractive young ladies. I think they might have been cheerleaders or whatnot. But anyway, and they were always together. And they say, you know, those guys in Vietnam are just like the pigs in LAPD. And it just hit me, because my buddies were still there and still getting letters from them. And at that time, they were being overrun. If you look at the history of Quang Tri of the 5th Mech, we weren't doing good. I think it was around September of 1972. So it just freaked me out, and I turned around and I started yelling at these girls, you don't know what the heck you're talking about. My buddies are still there, so your brothers don't have to be there. And I lost it. I mean, I was spitting and...
Right, you were animated?
Yeah, and all of a sudden I hear from the professor, get out! out. So I said, okay, fine. And I start to get up, and he goes, not you. You two, out of here. Now, you can't do that. Oh, yes, I can, and don't come back. And then he just goes back. Now, where were we? How does that relate to concerted action in sociological, All right, that's cool.
Right, yeah.
That's real cool. So, of course, I take Dr. Mayers for every class I can,
Right.
Okay, so I go to Cal State Northridge, and I finish up my bachelor's degree. I got a bachelor's degree in sociology and social work. Actually, it was social welfare, BSW. And it was the last day of classes, and I'm up at the what they call Sierra Hall up there at the. And I run into a guy who was also a sociology major, and he says, "Oh," we started talking about mutual professors we took at Valley, and he says. Did you ever take Dr. Mayers? I said, Dr. Mayers? Oh, he's my hero. I love him, blah, blah, blah. He goes, yeah, I was there, because this guy was there about a year before me. He says, yeah, I was there. It was terrible when he lost his son in the Tet offensive. So all of a sudden I go, oh, wow, man. So then I knew what happened, So that was kind of a mind blower.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So my respect for him went threefold after that. I never did see him again or nothing. It's not like I went back.
So you never said, "Hey, why'd you do this?" or anything. Just accepted it.
I just said no. And those girls never came back.
Huh.
They never came back. I was, I'm going, this is great.
Right. Do you look back? Do you still have that survivor's guilt?
Probably.
Okay.
To be honest, I mean, yeah.
Okay.
I know I do.
How does that, whether even consciously, or did that change how you lived your life?
I'm sure it did. You're catching me in a tough one here because I am a licensed therapist.
Well, that's not my role. I'm just curious how that plays.
But, I can't deny what it's sort of like all my life I've studied human behavior, and part of that study is a journey into my own dynamics.
Right.
So no, I can't deny that. In fact, talking about it, I can feel a little bit of teary-eyed just behind the door there, And when I see Army movies, or especially they have such reality stuff now where these guys are out there with cameras on their heads and actually going through it. I love watching it, but there's a kind of an undertow to it. And it drags me down a little bit sometimes,
Yeah. What is there any? There's been so much war movies, war literature, even war songs. That's something as a sociology guy you understand. and there was I've talked to many of the Vietnam veterans who said, I was raised on the World War II heroic.
Oh yeah.
And so, but there's been a lot of movies and literature made about Vietnam.
Yes.
Is there any either literature or movies or music that seems to speak that you say, that matches my experience. That was how it was. Some of these other movies maybe not, but that.
Yeah. I don't know exactly the song, but the Doors, I don't know if it's just because a lot of guys listen to them there, but some of their stuff, like The Unknown Soldier, some of their music, and Hendrix, sorry folks.
No, hey, listen. No, there's no.
Jimi Hendrix,
right, yeah.
A lot of, when you start to abstract and get into metaphoric thinking,
right.
There seems to be a real correlation to that music, and the Vietnam experience, particularly the Vietnam experience, which was a very strange experience. People are strange when you're a stranger, it seems like Jim was even there,
right,
even though I never saw him.
Right. So what's the, a couple of folks that we've talked with have said something to the effect, and I won't say it probably half as eloquent as they did, that Vietnam could be moments of boredom punctuated by moments of sheer terror. What was the daily experience like for you?
I don't know if there was ever boredom for me. I mean, it depends where you were. I know where we were, it was always like an alert kind of an ongoing state of, unless, I mean, there was a lot of drug use, and especially marijuana and alcohol and stuff like that. So there was a lot of that. And, so the boredom was really punctuated probably by at night, a lot of people partying and stuff.
Was there a fatalistic bent to that?
Well, for me, maybe, because again, in the back of my mind, I said, just live every day and, try to get through each day. But if if it happens, it's expected in a way,
Yeah.
So, and also our unit caught it's almost like a guilt trip, because I was a motor sergeant and I was behind the lines kind of, even though I exposed myself when I went up to Charlie too. But it was almost like, we had casualties all the time. We were an infantry unit. So we had people out there, in firefights and everything else, and casualties every day. In fact, I don't know if this would be a story that would be popular to some people, but I'll tell you one other event that I think blew my mind and changed me a little bit. One day, it was around Christmas 1970, and they had flown in a band from Saigon, a Vietnamese band, and they were going to be playing at this old Marine where they put airplanes, wing or something like that. So we had to walk about a quarter mile to get there. So it's raining, and about 7, 8 of us were walking over there, And we get there, and lo and behold, they were emulating Janis Joplin. They weren't too bad, actually, but we decided, let's go back to the barracks and listen to something else. So as we're walking back, it's nighttime now, and it's raining, and a lot of mud on the ground, and we had to cross over some barbed wire. That separated the Marine thing, but there's no Marines there. They were gone. But so we hear this kind of like blah, 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 mumbling or some, like a walrus kind of thing. And we look over, and there's a big hump about 15 yards from us, and it's a person. And we go over there, and we turn this person over. They had mud in there, and all of a sudden the cross hits me. It was our chaplain, and he happened to be Catholic. And he was a big, strapping man also, like the sergeant there. He was a huge guy. I mean, 6'5", 6'6", an Irish guy. I'm sorry, guys, but he was Irish because he talked like, he had that Irish thing. But he was drunk. And here I went to parochial school. And for me, it was sacrilegious because I saw priests and nuns as perfect, in my mind. I'm just, I had just 19 years old, and I'm blowing my mind. And he's going, "God bless you all. If you die, I will have services the same day and write your parents." And,
Wow.
And I'm thinking, instead of feeling sorry for the guy and thinking he's having acute anxiety disorder, and he was a great priest in a way when I look back, because some priests would just have services once every week on Sunday. Every time there was a casualty, he'd have that chapel would be used all the time. So we got to get him back to his unit. He's a big man. So the 7 of us are trying to lift this guy up. We drop him once on barbed wire. Luckily, one of our guys was a medic. He had to actually stitch him up on his leg or something. So we get him over to his unit, and he happened to have a hooch that was, it was kind of pretty cool. It was upgraded from the rest of us, but it had stairs you had to go up. And then he had his own, bedroom up there. So we get him up there, and, one of the guys says, "All right, let's take his clothes off, wash him." I said, "What?"
Right.
I can't see a naked priest. I'm leaving. I'm gone,
right. This is not.
This is not.
Listen, I'll put my life on the line, but no naked priests.
No naked priests. Not today. So, of course, every time I had an experience, I start writing home, "Dear Dad." Not only is this not Patton's Army.
Right, but now I'm seeing naked priests.
But now the priests are drunk and naked. I'm kidding. Sorry, guys. I'm not your turn. So, when I got home, that affected me. Back when I got home, the sociology program at LA Valley was very liberal. I went from, almost becoming an atheist just about. I was rebelling. It was all phony. Religion is pretenses, nothing because of this priest.
Right. So not only is your life messed with, just in general, you're seeing people die, but your faith, which could be a bedrock, is being shaken too.
Right. So, yeah. And my parents still were going to church, and they said, "You want to come to church?" And I said, "No." I'm thinking naked priests.
Right.
But as I got older and as I matured, I went through something. I got special training in the 70s in something called Gestalt therapy, which I actually teach now, and it's a very insightful kind of thing. And I went through 15 months of that. I matured, and I'm back to. I'm Christian,
right,
and I'm Catholic, and I do go to church, not as much as I should, but I do go, and I really have matured over the years. And even by the time I was 30, I think I was coming back to earth.
Right.
But that affected me for probably near a decade.
Yeah.
Coming out thinking, what right does this? They're all bad.
Right.
Now I look back and I'm thinking he was probably a great priest. Okay, he drank, obviously.
Right. Well, in my book, that probably qualifies him even better. But
yeah.
Depends on where you go.
Right. But he was probably very heartfelt. He probably had a real compassion for what he was doing, and he was writing letters all the time. If you look up our unit, we just scored casualties almost daily.
What's it like I think for a lot of us, we can conceptualize, but we can't understand. What's that like, just to see people that you were here one day, just do that as a matter of course? What's that like?
Well, again, I wasn't overexposed as a lot of infantry guys were. It's just, I've had a couple of buddies that didn't make it while I was there. But my direct combat experience was kind of limited, to, like I say, excursions that I ended up like, what is a good guy like you doing here?
Right. Yeah.
How did you end up here? Why aren't you back at the base?
Right.
But other than that, what I can say and relate it to in terms of the here and now, over the years, I've done work with the VA. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I have other credentials. I have a doctorate degree in psychology and blah, blah, blah. And what I have noticed, and I kind of ended up, specializing in this kind of by default, is, and even now I have two, but I'll get a new client or a patient, whatever you want to call them, that's referred to me that's a veteran, that had been seeing, and this is not against anybody who's not a veteran who's a therapist, but they are seeing non-veteran therapists. And it seems like there's a more, I don't know what the word might be, but a more congruent connection when they see a therapist that was a vet, and especially if they were in combat and a combat vet. Now, obviously, as a therapist, you have to be objective, and you can't do the countertransference thing and that. But there's a certain degree of connectiveness that they have that's almost more automatic. Like I'm seeing a Marine now who had traumatic brain injury. He was in a whatever they call them. We didn't have those then. What are they? Right.
Humvee,
anyway,
yeah.
What?
Humvee?
Humvee, yeah, right. And he was driving it, and an anti-tank weapon, ARP or whatever they call those things now, hit right in front of him. And, of course, he was injured. And I'm seeing him now, and part of what I'm trying to do with this gentleman is to simulate him back in society. He still comes in my office in fatigues and with his Marine thing on and all that, but he was telling me, this last therapist I had, I liked him as a nice guy, but I just couldn't connect.
Yeah.
And even though he was Iraq and I'm Vietnam, the combat experience is one in which I think, and the military experience even, is one in which is unique, and you really don't understand kind of unless you are in those boots.
Yeah.
Even if you weren't in combat, but in military, it's worthy, So, and I'm not saying, again, I get into my professional stuff now. I'm not saying that there isn't situations where a non-veteran therapist could not be effective with a veteran. I mean, that definitely could happen. But in a lot of cases, I think that, having that experience helps in the counseling anyway arena.
Sure. When you look back now, when someone says Vietnam War, or when you look back on that experience, because now there is time, you've had education, you've had some time to reflect on it. How does someone who was over there and served, how do they think about the war?
I don't know. Sometimes I just, there's a couple of movies that are very, Platoon is one. Iron Jacket or something like that. And then the one with Marlon Brando, Apocalypse Now. Mm-hmm. Those particular movies are extremely accurate. And I'll look at those movies and I'll just start crying. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, just arbitrarily. Usually when I'm alone, but there was a couple of Christmases ago where I don't know why my son wanted to watch something, and it was Vietnam, and I just had to leave the room. Yeah. And then he turned it off and said, hey, don't do that. I think it was my daughter, says, hey, Mike, you can watch that. Take the DVD home.
Right.
Dad has a little problem there.
Right, yeah.
We want him back here to open a present,
Right. That's not the present that we were looking for.
So,
right.
And I don't know if other guys have that experience, but it's in here. The Vietnam experience, when I look back, it's a heartfelt thing. It's just, it's almost not even a visceral brain level. It's an emotional. For me, it's at an emotional. A lot of it's emotional.
Right. What's the, I hope that these interviews are valuable in the here and now, but I also look at it as if someone looks back and wants to know about Vietnam from someone who is there, what do you hope they remember or know?
From me?
Sure, yeah. Or, what would you say? Someone, was able to time travel and say, okay, tell us, what should we remember from the Vietnam War? What do you remember that you would not want lost?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the things I would remember is that you're very fortunate to be in the United States and to value it. No matter where you are, you have an opportunity here that over in Vietnam I saw there wasn't those opportunities. There was hardly any medical care for the average person back there. Education was not even on the books. When I got off that plane to Travis Air Force Base, I literally kissed the ground when I got off. Literally kissed the ground, and it was raining. But and I think also the fact that to remember that unfortunately in the world we live in, a military part of your country is necessary. And if you're going to ask guys to serve in it, they can't say no, they can't question, they've got to be trained soldiers and Marines and whatnot, and they'll give their life for that flag and for that country. And I think the leaders and society in general has to respect that and not take advantage of it, not exploit it.
Yeah. When you were over there, One of the things that, now you were from California, a lot of the people who were born and raised in Montana said it was a lot different than Montana. What do you remember, just sights, sounds, smells, kind of the sensory things of Vietnam?
Sensory, huh?
Yeah.
Well, one sensory thing is, one of the things that I was surprised about was a military psychologist. I was being interviewed for another situation up at Fort Harrison, and he went on and he pulled out the fifth mech, the Quan Tri thing, and I'm going to say what the article said. I don't know the research that was done, but it said between 1964 and 1974, the Quang Tri province in Vietnam had expended more ordnance than all of World War II. And the reason for that is Quang Tri was never quiet. There was always B-52 things going on. There was constant round-the-clock artillery. So one of the things, we couldn't even, in our hooch, put something on a desk. We had to actually tie things down because there's always the boom, boom, the shaking, 24/7.
Wow.
So I remember that. So the sound is sort of like a constant banging, but it became normal after a while. And the smell of sulfur with that kind of ordnance was always there, And also, I hate to say this, but, we burned the defecation part of the human experience, and,
right.
and I actually had that duty a couple of times. Yeah, it was kind of weird. So the smells are kind of weird. Now, I will say one thing, though. Vietnam, when I looked at it sometimes, it was a beautiful country.
Yeah.
It was gorgeous. The other area, though, that was a problem was I was in a high concentrated area for Agent Orange. And unfortunately, what we used Agent Orange for was to make sure that foliage, trees, shrubs, and so forth didn't regrow after we burned them up with napalm. So that was kind of a strange deal,
Yeah.
So I don't know if there was it was kind of a collective smell of, I don't know, kind of overall when it comes down to it, a little toxic.
Yeah. Yeah, do you find, do certain smells or sounds trigger some of those memories?
Yeah. 4th of July, the first couple of, I live in Lockwood. I don't know if you know about Lockwood, but I don't know what goes on in Lockwood, but everybody blows up fireworks like crazy.
Yep, that's part of this.
And sometimes it catches me off guard and I freak a little bit, Mm-hmm. When I first came back from Vietnam, this is absolutely a true story. I had a Volkswagen. I finished up at LAVC, LA Valley College, and I was going to Cal State Northridge. I lived in Encino, of course, the north side of Encino Boulevard, so it wasn't like I was rich. So I was going up Lindley Boulevard. Lindley goes all the way to the front gate of Cal State Northridge. And I'm driving up there, must have been 1974. In my little Volkswagen, and all of a sudden I look over here and there's I don't know if he was Japanese, Vietnamese, but it was an Asian kid that must have been playing, when I was a kid we could say guns, playing guns outside.
Yep.
And he had a rifle and he was aiming it at me. And it was a toy. I literally took my Volkswagen off the road and went into railroad tracks and wrecked my front end of the Volkswagen. And couldn't get to school that day. You know how much that cost me back in those days?
Right, yeah.
And I had my dog in there, and I literally went off the road. So those are the kind, but then I was still fresh. Here it's 1974, I got back 72, so, or 71. So, I mean, it was still a fresh item.
Yeah.
So that won't, I don't think that had happened today, but I still sort of get jarred if somebody's behind me, and I don't, and they kind of sound sneaky,
right,
or something. I do have, and I do have a kind of a impulse reaction at times.
Sure.
My son one time, this is way back in the mid '90s. Michael, I was I was going downstairs in the basement, and Michael jumped out at me to scare me.
Yeah.
And I grabbed him and threw him against and I just stopped. And I said, Mike, don't do that, son. He must have been 14.
Right.
I mean, I caught myself. I mean, so there is, I still have kind of a knee-jerk reaction to certain stimulus, if I can use that term.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think
it's probably called PTSD.
right. But I call it a knee-jerk. Right, exactly. No. What have I missed? We've covered a lot of ground. Are there any areas that I've missed?
Well, for me, there's a lot of things that, I haven't told you and I won't tell you. But
fair enough. That's the ground rules.
But when I told you I would do this, at first I was hesitant. Mm-hmm. And I had another part of my life that she talked to me like, you should do this. I mean, and when I said on the phone, if I do this, will it benefit, the veteran nation or the Vietnam veteran nation? And some of the stuff that I told you here is, stuff I don't talk about.
Sure, and I appreciate that.
But I decided when I did this, I was going to be open and just let it flow. Because if anything I said in this interview helps the perception that others who may be viewing this, who might be the general public, in terms of understanding the Vietnam situation, but also realizing that situation blends into all the other vets. I mean, there's one thing about, the combat veteran is a different breed. It's a different, once you get that tattoo in your brain, it's not like you're ruined or anything, obviously. In fact, it could be a lot of strength involved in bringing that into your world, into society. For me, it really drove me to get my education. I think that if I hadn't been over there, I would not have been in fact, I kid sometimes, and I don't know if this might be partially true, but people say, wow, your father didn't even think you'd go to school and blah, blah, blah. How'd you do it? Oh, I got my degree out of anger.
Yeah.
I just was pissed off. I was going to get every degree I get. They were going to pay for me. So you can take that and soften it and look at it, and maybe there was a certain degree of ambition that actually evolved, or like a volcano kind of poured out, that I said, I can't fail.
Yeah.
I can't fail. I mean, God got me back here. I didn't think I was coming back. Thank you, God. Now, I got to take advantage of everything I can. And I'm not stupid. Hey, Dad, you're off.
Right.
I don't expect you to go to college, Right. What are you talking about? I can go to college.
Right. Don't
do this. So part of me wanted to prove to him maybe, and I didn't want to admit that for years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and after I got these degrees, oh my God, like I got the AA degree, and he says, my mother says, honey, Paulie got the AA degree from Valley. Oh, that was just a trend, because there's girls there. Hey, Paulie got a bachelor degree and a two bachelor's degree, and he made a cum laude. Oh my God, moron. We got to go to the graduation. Paulie went to Fresno State University and got a master's degree. Oh my God, send him $1,000.
So suddenly you had gone from
right, and then I'd come over the house and he'd go, hey, Antoinette, Paul's here. Do you got any meatballs? Hey, Paul, sit down. How are you, son? So I go from this
from maybe a plumber to
from a plumber to put out the car. Paul, he's here.
You got meatballs. That's pretty good.
Oh, meatballs. Hey, brajol. Yeah, Most Charlie. What do you want, Paul? We got it for you. So this is I made this into a comic thing. In fact, some of it I actually use in my teaching to get my students to laugh a little. But
well, it works.
True.
Right. Yeah. Do you so you see some of those parallels between how we treated Vietnam in a negative way? We maybe have gotten better at treating our vets who are returning today, but you still see some of the residual effects of what war does.
Oh yeah, sure. These guys coming back now still have probably the same, if not worse, conditions to try to readjust in. Many of them have, because of the nature of the Iraq and the way they use those landmines and whatever they do there. I mean, a lot of guys are living through it, but coming back without legs and arms, and then to get over the wall. And I've learned this over the years. The VA is an excellent system. It really is, and you will get great treatment and immediate, but you got to get over the wall. Yeah. That's the term, and it's an administrative wall. Once you get over the wall and you're designated with a disability and you're in the system, you're cool. But it's getting over the wall. It might take 5, 10, 15 years to get over the wall, but you got to be persistent. So, I think there's still the same circumstantial, systematic or system-oriented problems a lot of these guys face that we faced. The one thing good, though, is they're looked at, and I don't know if this is a superficial or not, but at least it's there. They're looked more at with respect and as heroes, where when we came back, we were slugs,
Right. How many babies you kill? Yeah.
How many babies your buddies killed today? I mean, I won't go into that one. I told you before the interview where that went. But some football player said that to me, in the bathroom, and it wasn't a good deal. But
so you see that change as at least possible.
Yes. Oh, yeah. There's a lot. You know what? I happen to ride a motorcycle, and it happens to be a Harley Davidson, and I ride with people, and I do a lot of benefit stuff, for the VA and for cancer and for, abused kids and things like that. But, on my vest, I have U.S. Army or I have, the Vietnam vet or whatever. Do you know I've been thanked more in the last 4 or 5 years since I've been riding here than I ever was? I don't even remember getting thanked before the year 2008.
Why?
I don't know. Well, and I know because of the image of the Vietnam veteran, I think. But I just, of course, I didn't run around with patches either. But right. But I just never, and I think even if I did, because I used to wear, when I started college, my Army stuff. And actually, I started not wearing it by the time I was a sophomore. It wasn't popular.
Right.
Where today you wear it proudly, and I think that's the big difference, and people will say, thank you for your service. I've had that said to me so many times now, and it had never been said to me before.
Well, Paul, I thank you. And I thank you for your service, and I also thank you for sharing your story, and I hope that's the reason you're telling your story is exactly the reason we're collecting the stories, is so that we hope it means something to people, not only in the future but also to other vets, and to get that variety. And we couldn't have done it without you. So I just want to thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your stories.
Thank you very much for having me.
You bet.